You don't exist. Take a perk and a talk of that shit. Money swallowed like sis. Dead up perfect in the kid. Got a billion who take on my head. Look me better put on the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million. The devil that shit ain't not cheaper than again.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the first part of What If Deku Enters Assassination Classroom. Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of NerdofSpades on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Bag bouncing at his side and breathing heavy, Izuku bolted out of the forest and made a sharp turn to try and avoid as much of the main campus as possible. He couldn't afford to get caught by Daisuke-kun and his friends. Not again. Not now that he was in E-class. If he could make it off campus before they found him, if he could just keep ahead of them long enough, then he would be safe. A yelp slipped from his lips, choked off as the collar of his shirt bit into his neck and he was yanked backwards and around a secluded corner of the school. Izuku's eyes closed and his arms came up to block any blows to his face, not that it would help, they never hit his face. When his back slammed against the wall and the hand moved to hold him by the front of his shirt, Izuku let out a small whimper. "Tch," his attacker snorted. "You really are that pathetic." Izuku cracked open his eyes to find a familiar shock of blonde hair and angry red eyes. "Oh, hi, Kaken," he said quietly, his arms lowering. Maybe Kaken hadn't been the nicest person to Izuku, but at least he had left Izuku alone once they entered junior high. Mostly. Kaken was still willing to hurl insults, but he never touched Izuku. All in all, Izuku wasn't sure what to make of the situation right now. He was probably in for a tongue lashing, but compared to having his notes destroyed, it would be fine. "Don't call me that, Deku," Kaken growled. "It makes it sound like we're friends." Kaken looked him over for a moment, taking in the smaller boy's form before turning his attention to Izuku's hands, still slightly raised. He reached forwards and pulled the notebook Izuku was carrying out of his grip. "Hey, that's mine." "Shut up, Deku," Kaken said, looking closer at the book Izuku had forgotten he'd been holding in his mad dash to get off campus. Daisuke-kun destroyed Izuku's school notes, but not his hero notes. There was never enough time for that. "Tch, you still think you can be a hero, huh, Deku?" There's no harm in trying, Kaken," Izuku muttered, turning his face to the side. Kaken laughed. "Please, a quirkless piece of SHT like you is only going to get in the way of the real heroes. You can't even fight off schoolyard thugs, much less actual villains." He tossed the notebook to the side. "Please, Kaken, can we just skip all this? We can both go home and you can go back to pretending I don't exist." Kaken's face twisted into a snarl, small pops bursting from his hands. Izuku flinched away. "With the way you are, you're just going to bring down our school's reputation. It might be a piece of SHT, too, but at least people think highly of it. If you keep running around with impossible dreams, you'll just drag Aldera's reputation through the mud with you, so drop it." Kaken tossed the notebook away. Izuku shrunk back into the wall. This isn't how he expected his day to go. Kaken let go of Izuku. People know greatness when they see it. The best heroes all have stories from their childhood, people just looked at them and knew. "But you were never destined for anything," he said. "Tch, Deku." Finally, he turned and began walking away. Izuku hesitated for a moment before scrambling off the wall to pick up his hero analysis notebook. "Hey, Deku," Kaken called over his shoulder. "If you want to be a hero that bad, there is another way." Izuku felt his heart sink as Kaken's sneer grew wider. "All you have to do is pray you'll get a quirk in your next life and take a dive off the roof." Izuku flinched and reared back. He could hardly believe Kaken would be willing to say something like that. Not necessarily because Kaken wasn't capable of it, but because it put his precious perfect record at risk. It would be easy for Izuku to ruin him now, but he would have to ruin himself in the process. Pushing those thoughts out of his head, Izuku turned, tucked his head down, and started his walk home again. Maybe he should take the long route today. It was pretty isolated and would give him plenty of time to sort out his feelings and put on a brave face before he got home. The last thing he wanted was to worry his mother again. Izuku hadn't been able to stop grinning since he had agreed to All Might's offer. Even now, hours later, laying in bed and trying to fall asleep, he felt giddy. He felt like he was walking on cloud nine and everything was going to be alright. But there was the slight problem of turning his grades around. He wasn't going to make it into UA if his academic career was in shambles and he couldn't pass the written exam. He was going to have to recommit himself to his studies as well as his new training regimen. He couldn't afford to disappoint All Might. Which was probably why he had neglected to mention that small fact to his hero. If All Might realized what a failure Izuku was, he'd probably rescind his offer and give his quirk to someone with a better chance of actually making it into a heroics course. Thinking it over, Izuku was probably going to need some help with the getting back on track thing. He'd fallen far enough behind that it was going to take a lot of effort to simply catch up, much less MSTR the material well enough to pass his exams. He should probably talk to Yukimura-sensei about it tomorrow after class. Maybe even apologize for being so disconnected from the class earlier. Yeah, that would help. It was a start at least. He just hoped he would be ready in time. Of course, nothing was ever that easy. 3 weeks into the school year, and already things were falling apart. At least Izuku could definitively say it wasn't his fault. At 2 weeks, the moon exploded, and Yukimura-sensei disappeared. The next day, All Might left, too. He at least gave Izuku a quick text saying he wasn't going to be able to attend their training for a while, but that if Izuku followed the training guide, everything would be fine. For the week following Yukimura-sensei's disappearance, which no one actually seemed all that concerned about, why wasn't anyone saying anything? Why was she gone? What happened? Class 3E had a rotating set of substitutes until a replacement could be found. A new student joined them as well, making quick friends with Nagisa-kun. For the week following Yukimura-sensei's disappearance, Izuku felt listless and abandoned. His teachers were gone, and All Might didn't respond to any of Izuku's texts. They would only ever be read every few days, and even then, All Might never said a single thing in response. What if he found someone else? Was he leaving? Should Izuku even bother with cleaning up the beach? Then things got weird. A man with some kind of mutation quirk that made him look like a large yellow octopus was standing in front of the class with government officials introducing him as their new teacher. And explaining that this man destroyed the moon, and apparently his appearance wasn't his quirk. Izuku was still struggling to get his head around that one. Oh, and they were supposed to silence him. But it wasn't going to be easy. Not with someone that smart and that fast. Mach 20. Really? How were they supposed to hit someone that fast? And all they were given were some RBB knives and BB guns. But, hey, the 10 billion yen reward money would sure be nice. Not that a quirkless failure like him stood a chance. Especially not when All Might couldn't even land a blow. At least that explained where All Might went and why he was so busy. And remember, Karasuma-san said from the front as the government agents behind him began filing out, this is a state secret. You can't go telling your friends and family about this. If you do, you, and whoever you told, will be subject to a memory quirk and removed from the program. There was a slight pause. Try your best, the world is counting on you. Well, this was going to get complicated. Izuku glanced down at the small block in his hand for the millionth time, running his thumb over the familiar kanji. He didn't know what to do. He needed to put the name plaque back up, he knew that much, but that wasn't the problem. Izuku wanted to be a hero. Izuku was training to be a hero. What kind of hero listened to a villain threaten people's families, threaten their own family, and just sat back and did nothing? At the same time, what could Izuku do? He wasn't fast enough or strong enough or clever enough to kill a monster like korosensei. He couldn't tell anyone either. He highly doubted All Might would have been okay with their plan of letting middle schoolers handle this, which meant he didn't know and was never supposed to know. Which meant that, even if he'd been involved previously, Izuku would only get in trouble for talking to him about it. Then there was the problem of korosensei's speed. He could go to every student's home and bring back a souvenir in a second. He might not be the subtlest person in existence, but no one seemed to notice the Mach 20 octopus flying through the air earlier today, which meant he could be. He could watch and listen and Izuku wouldn't know until something stupid happened. Likely after korosensei learned something Izuku didn't want him to know. Izuku carefully put the name plaque in his pocket, glancing around to see if anyone had noticed. Not that they would think anything was weird, but all this secret keeping was making him jumpy. He just needed to go home, put the plaque back before anyone noticed it was gone, get changed, and head to the beach to haul trash with all might. Easy. It was easy. Izuku needed to stop psyching himself out over simple things like this. No one cared. No one paid attention to him. Why would they? He wasn't anyone important by their standards. Just some random middle schooler. Moving trash got his mind off the problem for a little while. Until he remembered that korosensei seeing this and learning about All Might's true form was one of the problems he had been worrying about. "Hey, All Might," he said, slowing to a stop before he could grab another piece of rust-covered junk. "HM? Yes, Midoriya Shounen, what is it?" All Might asked, taking a few steps closer in his skeletal form. I was just wondering," Izuku began, his face starting to get a slight blush, "if someone, came across us, I should probably have something other than All Might to call you. It doesn't have to be your real name. I just don't want to go floundering for something that you might contradict later, and dash." All Might laughed. "At ease, Midoriya Shounen," he said, clapping a bony hand on Izuku's shoulder. "It's all right. It's something I should have thought of earlier, honestly. This beach is a public place, after all, even if no one comes here anymore. My name is Yagi Toshinori." Izuku beamed. "Right. Thank you, Yagi-san." Yagi-san laughed again. "All right, back to work now. We've got a lot of ground to cover." Izuku groaned, flopping down on his bed. With everything that happened in 3E, he really shouldn't be surprised that keeping secrets was going to be difficult. He thought he'd fixed the problem, or at least part of it, when he'd gotten Yagi-san's name. But now things were harder. He didn't think there was any physical way for him to fix this one. To keep the secret from spreading at all. He would be surprised if it hadn't already. That's what happens when one of your classmates is an AI that can transport her consciousness to other devices like his phone. The same phone that had All Might's contact information, saved under Yagi-san now, but those texts were still suspicious. The same phone that had a GPS chip and he took with him everywhere, including the beach. The same phone that could be used to listen into any conversations he had because that's how microphones work. He sighed again, sitting up. He might not be able to stop Ritsu-san from knowing, but he could, hopefully, keep her from telling anyone else. Which was really his only option other than trying to avoid talking about One for All, which he could only do so much. If All Might brought it up and Izuku deflected, he'd probably realize something was wrong. Probably. Maybe. Yagi-san wasn't always the most observant person. Izuku picked up his phone, pausing for a moment to wonder how he was going to get Ritsu-san's attention. He didn't think she just hung out listening all the time, but he didn't really know what else to do. "Ritsu-san," he whispered, cradling his phone. No response. This was weird. A blush covered Izuku's face as he realized he looked like he thought the phone was a magic talking rock with how he was holding it and trying to talk to it. Time for a different plan. Izuku scrolled through his phone, looking for anything he didn't remember putting there. A new app or contact information. Sitting there, as plain as day, was a new contact labeled Ritsu. Izuku quickly pulled it up, typing out a text message. "Hey, Ritsu-san," he wrote, "can we talk for a minute?" As soon as he hit send, Ritsu-san's figure appeared on his screen, standing next to the short message like it was the most normal thing in the world. Izuku shrieked slightly at her sudden appearance. "Hello, Midoriya-kun," she greeted. "What do you need to talk to me about?" Right," Izuku muttered, pulling his dignity back together. "There's some, things I don't really want the rest of the class, or the teachers, to know." "Are you in danger?" Ritsu-san interrupted. "What? No. I'm not dash. No. I'm fine." Izuku sputtered. "Korosensei's a bigger threat to me than this, secret." "Oh, okay then." Ritsu-san immediately went back to her usual calm self. "I only asked because I have been going through a lot of human media and your behavior was very similar to someone trying to keep others away for safety reasons." Izuku winced. She wasn't wrong. Not wrong at all. "Listen, I don't know how far your awareness of the data on our phones goes, and I don't want to assume you would go through my phone, but I want to make sure." Ritsu nodded. "That's understandable," she chirped. "I have learned that searching through someone's data is something of a... I think you call it violating someone's privacy. I try to avoid going through any data I don't need to. However, I cannot stop myself from seeing any data being interacted with while I am on a device, which is why I like to use my avatar when using my mobile Ritsu form." "Oh," Izuku said, slumping slightly in relief. "That's good. Thank you, Ritsu-san." "Don't worry," Ritsu-san said. "You're not the first one to bring up such concerns. Would you like to tell me what information you want kept private in case I see something by accident or one of the teachers requests the information?" Izuku hesitated. That had been his original plan, but did he really want to direct her attention to the information? She said she wouldn't look, and there shouldn't be a reason for anyone to ask about it, but... "Anything to do with Yagi-san," he said slowly. "It wouldn't hurt to be careful. Just in case. And I'd rather you didn't access the location data without talking to me." Ritsu-san nodded, smiling. "Alright, I'll do my best to stay out of your data and keep anything I learn to myself," she said. "Is there anything else you needed?" "No," Izuku said, smiling a little himself. "Thank you, Ritsu-san." "You're welcome. Good night, Midoriya-kun." "Good night, Ritsu-san." Izuku collapsed back on his bed again when Ritsu-san was gone. One more problem taken care of. Hopefully, he wouldn't have to do something like that again. Izuku couldn't help but wonder how he got to be tangled up in this web of secrets and lies. Izuku was exhausted. After months of training at school and clearing Dagoba Beach for All Might, Izuku was reaching his limit. He'd hoped he'd be able to keep up with both, but he honestly isn't sure why he thought that was a good idea now. Really, he thought he could handle two extremely intense training regimens simultaneously. What kind of idiot was he? As it was, Izuku wasn't just doubting his ability to keep up with everything at this point, nor was his current state simply affecting his physical performance. Nope, his grades were dropping again, and he knew Korosensei and Karasuma-sensei had noticed in their respective classes. How did he know? Easy. It was Korosensei and Karasuma-sensei. They always noticed these things. As much as he didn't like to admit it, All Might was a horrible teacher and had yet to notice anything was wrong. And then there was the other reason he knew that they had noticed. "Well, Midoriya-kun?" Korosensei pressed. "I know there's a reason for all of this, but I can't help you if I don't know what it is." He had pulled Izuku aside after class let out to speak with him and Karasuma-sensei in the teacher's lounge. At least it was just them. None of his classmates or beach sensei were still in the area. Izuku shuffled his feet, carefully looking anywhere but at his teacher. "Don't you, normally just follow your students for this kind of stuff?" he asked quietly. "Normally, yes, he does," Karasuma-sensei answered. "I managed to convince him to just ask you this time. I'm hoping it will mean a little less stalking in the future." Right, that made sense. Izuku turned his gaze to his feet. What exactly was he supposed to say? That he had been training with All Might? Or should he just lie? Promise it would stop and leave it at that? But he couldn't promise that. In order for it to stop, he would need to pick one. It shouldn't even be that strong. Just pick one and stop putting so much effort into the other training. It would be that simple. But he couldn't. He couldn't just pick one. If he gave up on All Might, that was like giving up on his dream. But stopping his assassin training would be like giving up on the world. Then there was the other part. Most of Izuku's classmates didn't exactly have the most sought-after quirks in the world. There were some mutation quirks, and 2 quirks that could be counted as heroic, but the rest? Their class was made up of either extremely weak quirks, villainous quirks, and the entire quirkless population of Aldera Junior High. And even with all of that, they were coming closer to killing korosensei than even All Might. Izuku had watched his class find ways to beat even the best in the school. He had watched them train and succeed, with and without their quirks. Something in him had changed. "Korosensei, Karasuma-sensei," he said slowly, eyes screwed shut. This was beginning to feel just like the time with All Might on the roof. He hoped it had a better ending. "Do you think I can be a hero? Even without a quirk?" Izuku stood there, fists clenched, and waited. He wasn't going to say anything else until they answered. "Of course, you can." Izuku's eyes opened and his head snapped up to stare at korosensei. He thought. "Not so fast there," Karasuma-sensei interrupted. Izuku could feel his heart sink back down to his feet again. Of course, it wouldn't be that easy. Sure, you can be a hero. You'd be great at it. But getting the license isn't going to be easy. That's what he had a problem with. Not. He thought Izuku could be a hero. A good one. "We can address the issues of the how later, Karasuma-sensei. For now, I think Midoriya-kun needs some reassurance." "Huh?" Karasuma-sensei grunted, turning a confused face back towards Izuku. "Oh, SHT. You're crying. Easy there, kid. Just, calm down." Izuku whipped at the tears with his sleeve, trying to choke down sobs. They believed in him. Even without a quirk, they believed in him. "Midoriya-kun," korosensei said quietly, offering a tissue, which Izuku took, "you undoubtedly have the potential. You are kind, compassionate, and strong-working. Even if you don't stand out among your classmates in any one skill, you are still above the average for the class, and your class is anything but average. I am a little concerned about what kind of hero you want to be though. You're an All Might fan, are you not?" Izuku finished cleaning his face for the time being and stifled his tears. "Why yeah," he nodded. "I'm not entirely sure why that's important." "Everyone likes All Might," said Karasuma-sensei. "Ah, but people almost invariably try to emulate their heroes if they go into the same field. Especially when they are celebrities," korosensei answered. "Do you know where I'm going with this, Midoriya-kun?" Izuku shook his head. Do you remember what I told Sugino-kun?" he asked. "You were there, I believe. It was the first time you attacked me in earnest and not just because someone else told you to." Izuku thought for a moment. He remembered that day. Korosensei had gone to a baseball game to learn some things to help Sugino-kun improve his pitch. Sugino-kun had been trying to emulate a professional pitcher, despite the fact that You're talking about how I can't be like All Might, Izuku answered, because I don't have a quirk. Korosensei's face turned red, with a dark circle on it. Correct. Although, I would amend that a bit. I don't know if anyone could really be like All Might. His quirk is truly something else, and then throw his charisma on top of that. It's no wonder he became the symbol of peace. But you don't think I can? That was never in the cards for you, Midoriya-kun, Karasuma-sensei said. Just like how Sugino-kun won't ever throw Arita's fastball, you will never throw a Texas smash, Korosensei confirmed. Well, they weren't entirely accurate. But that was beside the point. So, Midoriya-kun, Korosensei continued. What kind of hero do you want to be? Izuku blinked. What kind of hero did he want to be? You don't have to answer now, but it will go a long way to making sure your goal is attainable. In the past it was easy. He wanted to be like All Might. He wanted to make people feel safe with a smile. He wanted to be hope. But things had changed. Even All Might only thought Izuku could be a hero if he had a quirk. And All Might had opened a path for Izuku to follow that dream to the letter. Now, Izuku had two teachers that knew his skills better than almost anyone, telling him he didn't need a quirk. That he could be a hero of his own kind. And it felt right. Like it was something he had always needed. Always known. Something in him was resonating with the very idea of stepping forward under his own power and I want to be someone I would have looked up to as a child, Izuku finally answered. I want to be a hero to all the quirkless kids out there. A sign that they can be whatever they want to be, no matter what anyone else says. I don't want them to suffer like I did. The tears were back again. I don't want anyone else to grow up thinking they're worthless and weak just because they don't have a quirk. Karasuma-sensei stiffened in his chair. A wonderful answer, Midoriya-kun, Korosensei beamed, ruffling Izuku's hair with one tentacle. Now, Karasuma-sensei, we consider the how because, unfortunately, Midoriya-kun, he is right about that. It is going to be extremely difficult for you to get a hero license. Izuku's head dropped. Right. Karasuma-sensei sighed. Alright, let's talk strategy, but we are coming back to the comment about thinking you're worthless. Agreed, Korosensei said blithely. Izuku wasn't sure whether or not he should be regretting that statement, but he'd certainly be finding out by the end of the conversation. First things first, Karasuma-sensei began, you need to stop overworking yourself. You need to build up your strength, yes, but you'll do the opposite and hurt yourself if you keep going as is. Izuku winced but nodded. On top of that, your assassin training will be invaluable, but will also leave you vulnerable in a battle. You need more than that. May I suggest mixed martial arts? Korosensei said. It would provide Midoriya-kun with offensive and defensive capabilities outside of assassination tactics and would provide him with the chance to develop his own fighting style from a unique blend of techniques, while also giving him a wide variety of tricks to pull from. Yeah, MMA is probably his best bet for hand-to-hand combat, Karasuma-sensei agreed. For that, there are a few dojos I know in the area. I can probably make it look like additional assassin training and get the Ministry of Defense to pay for it, at least for the next year. I also suggest learning the art of improvised weaponry, Korosensei added with a laugh. It's indispensable for an assassin and will make you more unpredictable as a hero in the field. Also very true, said Karasuma-sensei. But it will be more difficult to teach. I'll look into that one over the next few days. I assume you have another reason for suggesting that. He turned his attention back to Korosensei. Korosensei chuckled. Of course, he said. You see, Midoriya-kun, this brings us to the next problem. We can train you up all we want, but if you can't get into a hero school, your career won't be going anywhere. Once there, your new teachers will have to take over preparing you for your licensing exams. And the unfortunate thing is, many schools have tests that are heavily weighted for flashy and offensive quirks, putting you at an extreme disadvantage. Some schools even have rules prohibiting quirkless hopefuls from applying for their heroics course. Yeah, I knew about that last part, Izuku muttered, and I guess I should have expected that the tests would be weighted against me. Not like anything else has ever been fair. Ah, but here is where we approach things like an assassin, Midoriya-kun. Can you tell me what you should do when faced with this roadblock? Research? Izuku answered. Partial credit, korosensei responded. You can do better than that. Yes, research is a crucial step, but what are you researching, and why? Well, Izuku said slowly. If it's going to be difficult to get in, I need to look at the schools where I am most likely to succeed. But I also need to consider the long term, which schools have the highest success rate for getting their students to pass the licensing exams. I should also probably look at the school's entrance exam rules. Figure out what I'm allowed to do so I can try and work them to my favor. Exactly right. Korosensei said, his face lighting up again. Now, the reason I brought up the improvised weapons is because many schools won't allow you to bring anything in, or, if they do, it has to be a support item necessary for your quirk, as approved by the government, or something you made. A few will allow just about anything in, but getting your hands on proper support gear would be just as difficult and usually illegal. So, the solution is to find small things you can make and bring that, or find items on the testing ground that you can use. Makes sense, Izuku conceded. Is there anything else? I don't have any suggestions, but I am going to make you do the research on the schools you will apply to yourself. And I am requiring that you at least try for UA as well. I will not have you simply give up on your dream school because you don't think you can pass. Have backup plans, but UA is the most likely to get you a license. We cannot forget that. Korosensei turned to his fellow instructor. Karasuma-sensei, do you have anything to add? No, I think you about covered it, he said. So, let's go back a bit. Midoriya-kun, who told you you were worthless? He asked, leaning forward, gaze even sterner than it usually would. Izuku shifted nervously. Most of the main campus student body. Anyone else? Korosensei pushed gently. Some of the staff, Izuku muttered, ducking his head, and, Terasaka-kun. I didn't quite catch that last part, Midoriya-kun, Karasuma-sensei said. Izuku winced. He had hoped he would get out of this without causing problems in class. Terasaka-kun, he said louder, his voice wavering slightly. But he's hardly the worst of it, and he stopped more recently. Karasuma-sensei was fuming. He took a deep breath in and let it. I don't think I can do much about the main campus, but Terasaka-kun will be facing consequences. Yes, he will be, Korosensei growled, his face starting to turn black. Karasuma-sensei sent Korosensei a slight glare before turning his gaze back to Izuku. Midoriya-kun, he spoke softly, if you ever need to talk, we're here. And if you decide you would rather see a professional, and not one this school has hired, I can help set that up as well. Izuku nodded. He could feel tears beginning to burn his eyes again. Korosensei still looked pissed, but another glare from Karasuma-sensei had him pushing the anger back in favor of looking after the student in front of him. Now, I have just one last thing, Karasuma-sensei continued. We never did get an answer as to why you were overworking yourself, Midoriya-kun. Izuku chuckled nervously. If I told you it would stop, would you leave it alone? Karasuma-sensei and Korosensei hesitated, exchanging a look. Alright, Korosensei answered. But if we notice this happening again, Karasuma-sensei continued, we will look into it. Izuku nodded and bowed. Yes, sensei. Thank you, sensei. Rising quickly, with a blush beginning to turn his cheeks red and a grin starting to pull at his lips, Izuku dashed out of the room, and began making his way to his next appointment. Only after he left did he realize they never asked what he was doing in his spare time that had worn him out so much. So, yeah, Izuku finished, bowing again. I'm grateful for the offer and the opportunity, but I would like to do this as a quirkless individual, for myself and for all the other quirkless people in the world, from here on out. All Might nodded. That's quite the lofty goal, he said, resting a bony hand on Izuku's head. I like it, he exclaimed, puffing up into his hero form. It truly is a worthy aspiration for someone as heroic as you. I will continue to support you however I can, Midoriya Shounen. Izuku straightened, grinning so wide his cheeks were starting to hurt. Thanks, All Might. Now, you mentioned a new training regimen? Yeah. Izuku answered, starting to bounce slightly in excitement. One of my teachers is helping me out. He suggested mixed martial arts and improvised weaponry. He used to work for the Ministry of Defense, so he knows some people and is working out a new training schedule now. That sounds good to me. All Might exclaimed, before coughing slightly and powering down. We can rest some then, and I'll rework the training schedule to fit in with your new level of activity. After all, we don't need to put on as much muscle as possible before the exams anymore. You need muscle, sure, but not necessarily that much. We'll also use some of our down days to work of theory, strategy, and law. You've got a great brain and I'd be a fool not to at least try and cultivate it. Right. I've just got one more question, said All Might. Huh, yeah. What is it? Izuku asked, calming down again. What changed your mind? You were so hyped and excited before. So committed. What happened? Oh, how was Izuku supposed to answer this? Time to spin the wheel of excuses. Saying that assassin training was giving him confidence was definitely not the right answer, mostly because of state secrets and all that, but what could he say? Anyway, spinning the wheel, and there it goes. It broke. It's gone now. Midoriya Shounen. Right, he needed to give an answer. Maybe just leave out the assassin part. I guess, a lot of things in my life have been changing lately and I have a lot more support than I used to. And I gained some confidence and new ideas in the process. I used to want to be just like you, but now I know I don't have to. I can be a new kind of hero. All Might grinned down at him. That works just fine by me, he said. The schedule was insane. Yeah, Karasuma-sensei had extra lessons after school let out, but they were optional, and filled the same time slot as most club activities they weren't allowed to participate in. Takaoka-san wanted mandatory training until well past sundown. Izuku needed to go home. Izuku needed to go to the dojo and to the beach. He had other training to attend. Sure, this guy seemed pretty nice. He was relaxed, cracked jokes, and got the class laughing. The sweets were nice too, even if Izuku couldn't really eat any with All Might's diet still in effect. What the hell? MyHeroacademia was on his feet and protesting just a hair faster than Izuku. This is impossible. We need time to study or our grades will drop. Izuku nodded, moving to stand beside MyHeroacademia. And some of us have responsibilities outside of class, too, you know. I have things I need to do after school. Yeah, some of their classmates joined in. Muttering broke out behind them. The chairman knew that when he approved the schedule. MyHeroacademia continued. There's no time for anything. No fun, no studying, nothing. Just training all day, every day. We can't do this. You'll overdash. Takaoka-san reached out and, in a moment, had his knee buried in MyHeroacademia's stomach, cutting off both boys and drawing distressed cries from the class. It's we will, not we can't, he said, serene smile never wavering. I told you right, he asked. That in our family I am the father. Is there a single family in the world where the father's orders aren't absolute? Never once did he stop smiling. My-hara-kun was doubled over on the ground, coughing and retching. The rest of the class was frozen, Izuku just off to the side, and the others, half crouched where they had been sitting. Izuku stepped forward and placed himself between Takaoka-san and his classmates. "My family," he spoke up. "My dad left us years ago. If he came back now, all he would get is a slap in the face and a kick to the curb." There was shuffling behind him as someone checked on My-hara-kun. "Well, that's no father then, is it?" Takaoka-san replied, his smile wavering slightly. "I'll have to show you how a real father does things." "Okay," he said, clapping his hand together and reverting to his overly cheery self. "First up is 3 sets of 100 squats each. And feel free to quit and leave at any time, if you want. I can always just replace you with some soldiers I raised up myself. Won't be too strong. Even if I replace a few of you, that octopus won't run away." Oh, this was bad. They couldn't afford to leave now. They really just couldn't. "But I don't want to do that," Takaoka-san continued, his expression seeming to soften. "You're all my precious family, after all." He began walking around the group, moving behind them as the students refused to move, for fear of drawing attention to themselves. "As the father, I don't want to lose a single one of you." He slung his arms around Kanzaki-san and Mamura-kun's shoulders, pulling them into a hug, grinning happily. "Let's save the earth together, as a family." Takaoka-san released his hug and stepped in front of Kanzaki-san, his hand resting gently on her head. "All right. You'll follow your father, won't you?" "Well." Kanzaki-san said. She was shaking. Izuku felt his muscles tense up. Takaoka-san was testing them. And they were assassins. More importantly, they were middle schoolers. They were Class 3E. There was no way it would end well. The shaking stopped, and Kanzaki-san lifted her head and smiled at Takaoka-san. "I don't want to. I'd rather have class with Karasuma-sensei." Didn't they all? Unfortunately, that wasn't the answer Takaoka-san wanted. He licked his smirking lips, wound back his arm, and smacked her. The crack resounded across their sports field, and Izuku saw Kanzaki-san's feet leave the ground as she fell. "Kanzaki-san!" Tsujino-kun yelled. He ran to his friend, Izuku breaking out of his stupor and following. Already, Kayano-san and Nagisa-kun were already there. Kayano-san was kneeling on the ground behind Kanzaki-san, steadying her and checking on her, while Nagisa-kun moved protectively in front of her. "You guys just don't seem to get it at all," Takaoka-san laughed. "Yes, is the only thing I should hear out of you. And if you have a problem with that," he raised his fists in a fighting stance, "then how about we let our fists do the talking? That's your father's forte." "Stop, Takaoka." The class turned. Karasuma-sensei was sprinting towards them from the building behind Takaoka-san. Takaoka-san's smile didn't fade one bit. Karasuma-sensei continued past him and went straight to Kanzaki-san, checking her over. Once assured that she was all right, he called after My-hara-kun. Satisfied in his student's condition, he turned his attention to Takaoka-san. "I'm making sure to hold back, you know, Karasuma," Takaoka-san spoke before Karasuma-sensei could say anything. "They're my precious family, after all." "No," a yellow tentacle came to rest on Takaoka-san's shoulder as korosensei came up behind him, "they are not your family. They are my students." A breath of relief could be heard from the class, along with a few cries of korosensei. "Heh," Takaoka-san chuckled, "is that a complaint I hear, monster?" Izuku felt himself clench his teeth as he bit back the urge to jump. To his teacher's defense. "I'm fairly certain I was the one put in charge of PE, Takaoka-san continued. Additionally, the punishment just now was perfectly within the bounds of a training session. This is all to train them in a short span of time to be the assassins that will silence you. It's only a given things will be rough. We don't have much of a choice on that. His grin turned predatory. Or what, would you attack someone who hasn't done anything to you just because their teaching methods are a little different? Izuku could see that Takaoka-san had korosensei backed into a corner, and he knew korosensei could see it too. Everything Takaoka-san had said was technically correct. Maybe he was towing the line of what he could use as punishment, but he was still on the right side of that line, at least as far as policy went. On the other hand, if they could push him to the other side of that line. Not that Izuku would ever suggest that his classmates put themselves in that position, but if he was going after Izuku, he wouldn't be watching the rest of them. Izuku would just have to take a page from Karmakun and figure out how best to PSS him off. Then Karasuma-sensei and korosensei could come in and take care of Takaoka-san without anyone quitting. Come, Karasuma-sensei, korosensei finally spoke, his eyes never leaving Takaoka-san. We need to talk. With that settled, the class hoped, that their teachers would be back soon. Takaoka-san turned his attention back to the class. Well, you kids heard me the first time, he said, sliding back into his jovial persona. 3 sets of 100 squats. Line up. The class hesitated but began falling into line. They just had to hold out long enough for the teachers to do something. At least, that's what most of them were thinking. Izuku waited a moment longer, watching his teachers talk. He then turned back to Takaoka-san, who was watching him with a smile that had gone slightly cold. Should he do something now? Or should he wait a moment longer and give the teachers some time to plan? Midoriya-kun. Takaoka-san called out, drawing the attention of the class. That is you, right? Yes, Takaoka-san, Izuku answered, before falling into line. Just a moment longer. Takaoka-san nodded, his smile growing firmer. All right, kids, hop to. He waited for them to raise their arms above their heads and begin the first set before turning away to watch the other teachers. Izuku joined his classmates at first, but quickly came to a stop when he noticed Takaoka-san wasn't paying attention. Izuku could feel the eyes of his classmates on him, watching and waiting to see what would happen as they forced themselves to continue, not ready to take the risk themselves, but Izuku ignored them. Instead he kept his attention solely on Takaoka-san. He didn't like the way the man was watching Karasuma-sensei, not that there was anything he could do about it. Hey, come on, man, Kimura-kun whispered from next to Izuku, it's not worth it. Izuku just waved him off. A small ripple went through the class, but Izuku continued to ignore it. God damn it, Deku, Terasaka-kun whispered behind him, what are you trying to do? Izuku barely flinched at the old insult. He hadn't realized how much he had gotten used to not hearing it once he moved to 3E. But that wasn't important. Izuku ignored the comment entirely. It wasn't like he could answer. Midoriya-kun, just drop it, Kataoka-san added from somewhere behind Izuku to his left. Izuku just quietly shook his head. Takaoka-san was finally taking notice. He had heard that last whisper. If you can still talk, then you aren't dash. He froze when he finished turning around and saw Izuku standing there, not a single drop of sweat on him. I think I'm starting to see why your father left you, Midoriya-kun, he said, keeping up his smile. You need a firmer hand. It must have been too much of a challenge for him. Izuku glanced at Karasuma-sensei one last time before devoting his attention to Takaoka-san. He swallowed once and steeled himself. You make a horrible father, Takaoka-san, he said. Makes me wonder who you looked up to as a child. Gasps filled the air, and Izuku could see some of his classmates slow or stop their squats. Keep going, kids, Takaoka-san said, forcing his persona to hold in place. You don't want to throw your lot in with a troublemaker like Midoriya-kun. This is your last warning, boy. Izuku crossed his arms and glared. He wasn't usually obstinate, but he'd seen Kaken kick up a fuss enough times growing up to know the script. The mask fell. His kind grin slid out of the way for an angry scowl and gritted teeth for just a second before he fixed it back in place once more. Then I suppose your father needs to punish you, he said, grinning as he pulled a fist back. The fist fell, and Izuku let it. He may have only had a few sessions at the new dojo, but that along with a childhood of running from bullies meant he could easily have dodged or blocked a right hook that obvious or wide. The next thing Izuku knew he was on the ground. His head ached, and his ears were ringing, but he could just make out people yelling in the distance. The sun was too bright, but it was rapidly getting more manageable. Why was Izuku on the ground again? Something about bullies? No, he hadn't been cornered by any bullies since korosensei joined the staff. Hadn't even seen Kaken around. And wasn't he at school? The voices stopped. Maybe a training exercise had gone wrong. That sounded about right, but something was missing. A new voice broke through the silence. That was Karasuma-sensei. He was saying something to Nagisa-kun. Why was he talking to Nagisa-kun? Maybe Izuku could figure that out if he could focus enough to hear what they were saying. They weren't that far away from him. Small and thin appendages wrapped around his shoulders and head, lifting him slightly and turning him to face something large, yellow, and round which was now blocking out some of the light. Midoriya-kun, can you hear me? Korosensei said quietly. Yes sensei, Izuku answered quickly, his tongue heavy in his mouth. That's good. Korosensei's voice was calm and soothing against the noise of whatever the rest of the class was doing in the background. Does anything hurt? Izuku scrunched up his nose at the reminder, his eyes closing. Head, he mumbled. Keep your eyes open, Midoriya-kun, Korosensei said, his voice becoming stern. Do you remember what happened? Did he? A new voice broke through the haze. It reminded him of new person. Batar. He hit me. That's right, you provoked him. Iwa, gonna be summon Izuku retorted. Korosensei hesitated for a moment. You still shouldn't have provoked him, Midoriya-kun. It is wonderful that you wanted to protect your fellow classmates, but you need to consider your own safety as well. You can't help anyone if you can't move. Izuku turned his gaze away. Korosensei had a peculiar way of expressing pride while also pointing out your mistakes. It felt to Izuku a bit like he was a disappointed parent. Midoriya-kun, your mind is your greatest asset, Korosensei said, resting the tip of one tentacle on Izuku's forehead. You need to protect it and use it, find a better way, and have a little faith in your teachers and partners to look after you the same way you want to look after them. We all care for you and don't want to see you hurt. A loud cry erupted from Izuku's classmates, and Izuku tried to twist to look and see what had happened. But Korosensei's tentacles held him in place. It seems Nagisa-kun was able to finish the fight for you, Midoriya-kun. Karasuma-sensei will be here in a moment. Izuku nodded slightly. Korosensei. Yes, Midoriya-kun. Thank you. It's the least I could do for one of my students. Footsteps approached rapidly. How is he? Karasuma-sensei asked, falling to his knees on Izuku's other side. The class fell silent, remembering what had started the fight in the first place. He seems to have a concussion at the very least, Korosensei answered promptly. Karasuma-sensei nodded and reached forwards and slid his arms under Izuku, lifting up gently. Korosensei's tentacles released Izuku into the care of his PE teacher. Get your rest Midoriya-kun, Korosensei said softly, and don't forget what I told you. I'll call the chairman, have him inform Midoriya-kun's mother while you take him to a hospital, he told Karasuma-sensei. That won't be necessary. Asano-san stepped through the last of the foliage that separated the forest from the satellite campus. He nodded carefully to Karasuma-sensei. Take care of the boy, I'll handle taking out the trash and calling Midoriya-san. Karasuma-sensei nodded in return and began his trek through the woods. Izuku relaxed in his teacher's arms. He and his classmates were safe. Takaoka-san would be leaving, and everything would be alright. As soon as his head stopped hurting, that is. Izuku focused on putting one foot in front of the other and the comforting presence of his mom beside him. She wouldn't normally walk with him to Sentoki-sensei's dojo, but she was understandably concerned that the concussion mixed with the unfamiliar route would cause problems. "Are you sure you don't want me to stay?" Inko asked as the dojo came into sight. A small and nondescript space rented out of a larger and even more nondescript building. That was how Sentoki-sensei liked it, no advertising, just teaching. Izuku quirked a smile at her. "I'm sure," he answered. "Even if I was silly enough to try and joining the exercises with a concussion, Karasuma-sensei has probably already told her about it." He paused in front of the door. "We get out at 9:30. I'll see you then." Inko hesitated. "How about I wait a few minutes before I leave, just in case? Sentoki-sensei might decide to send you home, after all." Izuku nodded. "If I'm not out in 5 minutes, you can go home." With that agreed on, Inko glanced around for a place to wait, and Izuku turned to walk inside. In the small entryway that served as a lobby, Sentoki-sensei was waiting, greeting her students as they passed to the changing rooms. She was a large woman, standing above 6 feet with wide shoulders. Her hair was a simple brown and stopped just above her chin, with one side cut slightly longer than the other. Her eyes landed on him and went cold. Izuku winced, stepping out of the way. "I wasn't planning on trying to sneak past you or work on any physical training today," he said quickly, before she could launch into a tirade berating him for not taking care of himself. Luckily, his statement took the wind out of her sails for a moment. "I just want to watch," he continued. "I know I'm not cleared for anything strenuous, and I know Karasuma-sensei already told you about what happened. Please, I just need something to do." She raised an eyebrow. "You need something to do, huh?" Izuku nodded, then winced slightly. It wasn't as bad as it had been, but moving his head too fast was still a big no-no. "Please, I'm not allowed to do anything. It's going to drive me nuts if I don't find something to keep me busy soon. I won't write anything down or do anything else the doctors told me not to. I'll just sit out of the way and watch." "Is this young man begging for lessons?" A tired gruff voice came from behind Izuku, startling him, and making him jump. He turned with deliberate slowness, moving back a step to allow the newcomer into the conversation. His face matched well with his voice, with bags under his eyes, a stubbly beard and mustache on his face, his hair pulled back into a messy bun, and his slumped posture all conveying just how tired he was with the world and, apparently, people begging Sentoki-sensei for lessons. "No, Aizawa, he's already got lessons, but he's also got a concussion," she answered. Aizawa-san's eyes moved back to Izuku, looking over him again with a new curious expression, rather than the tired dismissal they'd had before. Izuku swallowed nervously. He knew he was a bit of an odd duck, and on thin ice with Sentoki-sensei, as a result of Karasuma-sensei's meddling. This was an advanced class of students that he hypothetically shouldn't have been able to get into, but it also worked best with his schedule and would allow him to be in a better position when exams rolled around. Really the only reason Sentoki-sensei allowed it was because Karasuma-sensei had told her Izuku already had some training from him and had agreed for it to be on a trial basis. If Izuku couldn't catch up and keep up to her satisfaction, she'd drop him faster than korosensei could grade their homework. "He's in this class." Aizawa-san spoke up, breaking Izuku out of his thoughts. Thoughts Izuku had no doubt had left his mouth as terrified muttering. He hoped he hadn't said anything too bad. "Yes," Sentoki-sensei sighed. "Right, I should introduce you to Midoriya-kun, this is Aizawa Shoyuta. He helps out periodically and is one of my oldest students. Aizawa, this is Midoriya Izuku. He has joined this class as a trial and a favor to a friend. And he really should be going home." Izuku said nothing. If Sentoki-sensei was going to kick him out, there really wasn't much he could do about it. You said you were just going to watch. Aizawa-san asked him. Izuku blinked. Yes, sir. Just watching. Aizawa-san hummed. It is your decision, Sentoki-sensei, but I think he should be allowed to watch. He's a sneaky one, Sentoki-sensei warned. Aizawa-san shrugged. And you'll have some extra eyes on him today. I'm more than familiar with keeping track of rowdy teenagers. Sentoki-sensei snorted Aizawa-san's seeming joke, judging from both her reaction and the slight twitch of his lips, but Izuku wasn't quite sure what had passed between them. Either Aizawa-san was a teacher, or he had some kids of his own. Sentoki-sensei turned back to Izuku. Today's your lucky day, kid, she said. Now, go get changed. Izuku straightened up and beamed. Thank you, he said, bowing quickly to both of them, wincing again at the sudden movement, and walking as calmly as he could into the changing rooms. You know, he heard Sentoki-sensei say with a smile in her voice as he left, I heard he's trying for UA. He never got to hear Aizawa-san's response. Class 3E. The end class. The bottom of the barrel. Ryoka had thought he'd find people like him down here. People that weren't concerned with grades or appearances. People he could have fun with. Instead of a stagnant place where he could force his way to the top of the hierarchy, he found a place of growth. Everyone was doing better under that monster's tutelage. He'd at least hoped the quirkless loser would stay in his place, but even he kept climbing. His grades had risen steadily with korosensei's help, and he even seemed to be growing a spine. At least, he assumed that's why korosensei had been on his butt before he even managed to move in the Deku's direction to remind him of his place after he jumped up to place 72nd in the school, compared to his old rank of 164. And Ryoka's current rank of 159. Of course, korosensei hadn't liked anything Ryoka had to say about the matter and sent him out doing random SHT in the woods for a week after that. And then doubled down on his lessons to get him back up to speed with the rest of the class. As much as Ryoka hated him and tried to ignore the DMN octopus, he still wound up actually learning. Which is why when that Shiro BSTRD gave him a plan and some money, he went with it. Destroying the pool had been a blast, and the added cash didn't hurt. Watching the other students despair their precious pool had been well worth it, too. Of course, the DMN quirkless SHT had to go and start thinking again, giving Ryoka and his friends a weird look rather than despairing like the rest of the class. The hell are you looking at, Deku? He snarled, stepping forward to grab the flinching boy by the front of his shirt. Do you think we're the culprits or something? What is that going to get you? Deku only had the grace to look scared for a moment before getting this look on his face and opening his mouth like he actually had something to say. You're absolutely right, korosensei interrupted. Looking for a culprit isn't going to do any good, so let's not worry about that. And just like that, the pool was fixed. There you go. Good as new. Please, go play like this never even happened. Ryoka hated that octopus. He continued with the plan, even if things kept falling apart. Even if his friends, Taisei and Takuya and Kirara, were getting into this monster's lesson plans. It would work. It had to work. The octopus would be dead, and everything would go back to normal. They would have a normal teacher, and everything would be the way it was supposed to be. Only the rest of the class wasn't willing to listen to him. Go along, maybe, but not listen. Something to do with him not helping out with their assassination attempts. You'll do what I ask, won't you, Deku? He said, pushing the quirkless brat against the wall where he'd cornered him. No, I won't, he growled back, and don't call me that. It's not my name. You think you get to tell me what to do? You're nothing. If I'm nothing, I'd hate to know what you are. Deku glared harder. If you won't respect me, I'm not going to help out, no matter what korosensei says. I'm going to stay here, and when you come back all disappointed because you failed, I'll be waiting for you. I sure as hell am not going to waste my time on the half-assed plan you have cooked up. Seriously, how are you planning on getting him in the water? He's not going to do it just because you asked nicely or waved a gun in his face. You little dash. Deku slammed a fist in Ryoka's stomach, then quickly body-checked him to the side and knocked him to the ground, dancing out of reach before Ryoka could react. I'm not some little kid you can pick on anymore. I'm not gonna let you, or anyone else, pick on me just because I don't have a quirk. I can more than look after myself. Deku stormed off before Ryoka could recover. Ryoka growled to himself and pulled himself up. He had enough self-control and self-respect to not charge the smaller boy's turn back before he disappeared around a corner. Barely. It didn't matter anyway. The plan didn't need anyone as useless as him, and that was one less person to split the reward with. Izuku heard the explosion and knew Terasaka had done something stupid. How stupid he couldn't tell just yet, but it looked like he was going to go back on his word just to make sure the rest of his classmates were fine. Curse his heroic heart. When he reached the pool, he realized just how much he had underestimated Terasaka's bullheadedness. The pool was completely empty and the damn korosensei I had built to make the pool was gone, bits of rubble littering the ground near where it had been. In front of him, at the poolside, was Terasaka and Karmakuen. This wasn't your plan at all, Karmakuen said. Those two completely used you. I'm telling you, Terasaka yelled, hysteria taking over his voice and face, this ain't my fault Karmakuen. The ones who set this up are the real bad guys. And everyone getting carried away by the water. It's all because of them. Don't pretend you did nothing, Izuku hissed, causing Terasaka to jump and spin to face him. You took credit for this plan. You called it your own and lead everyone astray by letting them believe someone as incompetent as you was pulling the strings. If they'd known who was really behind this, I doubt anyone would have listened to you. He glanced at Karmakuen for confirmation. Karmakuen nodded. Shiro-san and Itona-kun, he said, by way of explanation. You're lucky the target moves at Mach 20, he said, icy calm, or you'd be guilty of mass murder. You got carried away, so how about instead of pointing fingers, you do something to fix it? He began making his way down the slope, following the small bit of water towards their classmates. Izuku shot Terasaka a burning look and followed. Even if Terasaka wouldn't think of something either he or Karmakuen would. They arrived to Shiro-san monologuing. It wasn't much, just listing off weaknesses he'd taken advantage of. Nothing overly useful, thought Izuku made note of what he said all the same. He can only manage so much with the water as a handicap, Kataoka-san said. It's not just the water, Terasaka said as he stepped out of the underbrush and onto the cliff face as the fight rang out below them. It's because he saved you guys. Take a look above him. Sure enough, there were students still within reach. And if Harasan's branch broke, it wasn't looking good. The class rambled on for a little bit, while Izuku watched the fight go on. As much as he could watch a fight faster than the speed of sound. It didn't take long for the rest of the class to figure out what Terasaka had been up to, and for Terasaka to confess his role. Guys with no drive like me are destined to be manipulated, Terasaka said. But you know what, I want to choose who's gonna pull my strings from now on. I've had enough of these guys. I don't care about the reward money either. Karmakuen, Midoriya, I'm all yours. Izuku's head jerked up at the sound of his name. As much as he'd been listening, he didn't expect Terasaka to involve him, much less actually use his name. He could see some of the other classmates were just as surprised as he was, but only a few that knew enough to realize it was weird. Izuku shared a glance with Karmakuen. He's all yours, Izuku said. Tell us what to do to clean up his mess. Karmakuen gave him one of his signature looks. Are you sure you want to go with my plan, he purred. You might just die. I'll do it, Terasaka said, striding forward. I can get it done. Even though I haven't told you yet. Terasaka stopped and sputtered. Karmakuen clapped his hands. I've got it, he said, his voice dripping with false cheer. Let's forget about rescuing Hara-san. What? That was. Terasaka exploded on the snickering Karmakuen. Okay, so that was just to get a reaction out of them. Fine. Although. You said you wanted Karmakuen to take your strings, Terasaka, Izuku reminded him, so while I'm glad you've learned to question things, Hara-san is right where she needs to be. Do what he says. Terasaka huffed but shut up and listened while Karmakuen gave a swift dressing down for wearing the same shirt 2 days in a row, among other things. Eventually, Terasaka got huffy again and demanded instructions, but things went smoothly after that. Terasaka even followed his instructions to the letter. He antagonized Itonakuen and Shiro-san and took the hit exactly like he was told, making the opening they needed to let korosensei save Hara-san and jump down to help level the playing field a bit themselves. Things settled down quickly after that. Shiro-san and Itonakuen retreated. Hara-san had some words for Terasaka, but the class quickly returned to normal. Well, almost. Normal would be Terasaka still being angry and isolated from the rest of the class and hating everything about this whole mess. And everything about Izuku. At least someone learned something from this. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 2. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author NerdofSpades on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.